born black nationalist and Pan-Africanist who lived from 1887 to 1940. He founded the Universal Negro Improvement Association, UNIA, in 1914, which aimed to achieve black nationalism through the celebration of African history and culture. Garvey also pushed for the Back to Africa movement and created the Black Star Line, a black-owned passenger line that would carry patrons back and forth to Africa. He fostered restaurants and shopping centers to encourage black economic independence. Garvey was a controversial figure in and out of the black community, especially as he challenged major thought leader Webb Du Bois. Marcus Garvey and Webb Du Bois had a contentious relationship. Both men were prominent black leaders in the early 20th century, but they had different approaches to achieving black liberation and empowerment. Du Bois was a scholar and intellectual who believed in the importance of education and integration. He advocated for black people to gain access to higher education and to fight for their rights within the existing political and social systems. Du Bois was critical of Garvey's Back to Africa movement and his emphasis on racial separatism. Garvey, on the other hand, believed in the importance of black economic independence and self-reliance. He saw the Back to Africa movement as a way for black people to escape the oppression and discrimination they faced in white-dominated societies. Garvey was critical of Du Bois' approach, which he saw as too focused on assimilation and integration. The two men clashed publicly and privately, with Du Bois criticizing Garvey's leadership style and accusing him of being a fraud. Garvey, in turn, accused Du Bois of being an elitist who was out of touch with the needs of ordinary black people. Their rivalry came to a head in 1922 when Du Bois published an article in The Crisis, the magazine of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP, in which he accused Garvey of being a dictator and a charlatan. Garvey responded by suing Du Bois for libel, but the case was eventually dismissed. Despite their differences, both Garvey and Du Bois were important figures in the black liberation movement, and their ideas and legacies continue to influence black activism and thought today. Here is a letter addressed to Marcus Garvey from Webb Du Bois, dated July 22nd, 1920.
Mr. Marcus Garvey, New York City. Answering your letter of July 16th, I beg to say that I thank you for the suggestion, but under no circumstances can I allow my name to be presented. However, I desire to publish in The Crisis some account of you and your movement. For some time, the crisis has been in receipt of inquiries concerning you and your organization. To these we have simply answered that we had no reliable information at hand. It seems, however, increasingly important as your movement grows that we should present to our readers a critical estimate of it. Signed Webb Du Bois, Mr. W.A. Domingo, New York City.
Another letter from Webb Du Bois addressed to Mr. W.A. Domingo on his opinions of Marcus Garvey.
Dear Mr. Domingo, I thoroughly agree with your thesis that in the attack on Garvey, the object should be the opinions of the man, and not the man himself or his birthplace. For American Negroes, to a much larger extent than they realize, are not only blood relatives to the West Indians, but under deep obligations to them for many things. Instance, without the Haitian Revolt, there would have been no emancipation in America as early as 1863. I, myself, am of West Indian descent, and am proud of the fact. My attitude toward Garvey has been, I think, consistent. First, I want him and all people to have freedom of speech, and I mean by this, real freedom. But the freedom that he takes must be granted to those who do not agree with him. Secondly, I think his propaganda for the most part is absolutely wrong, and to some extent criminal. So far as he is wrong, I want to expose it, and so far as it is criminal, he ought to be punished by the courts. I do not, however, believe in deportation for him or anybody else, and I do not believe that a man's birthplace, or his race, or his color furnishes any ground for attack.
You can enslave us without for 300 years the bodies of men. You can shackle the hands of men. You can shackle the feet of men. You can imprison the bodies of men, but you cannot shackle or imprison the mind. Garvey was born on August 17, 1887,
in St. Anne's Bay, Jamaica. His father was a stonemason, and his mother was a domestic servant. Garvey was the youngest of 11 siblings, and his parents instilled in him a strong sense of pride in his African heritage. Garvey attended school in Jamaica until he was 14, when he left to work as an apprentice printer. He continued to educate himself by reading widely and attending public lectures. In 1910, Garvey left Jamaica for Costa Rica, where he worked as a timekeeper on a banana plantation. He then traveled to Panama, where he worked as a laborer on the Panama Canal. Garvey was struck by the poor living and working conditions of black people in Latin America, and he began to develop his ideas about black nationalism and Pan-Africanism. In 1912, Garvey moved to London, England, where he studied at Birkbeck College, University of London, and worked as a messenger and handyman for the African Times and Orient Review, a journal that emphasized Pan-African nationalism. Garvey was influenced by the ideas of Booker T. Washington, who advocated for black economic independence, and by the writings of Edward Wilmot Blyden, a West African intellectual who argued for the importance of African culture and civilization. In 1914, Garvey founded the UNIA in Jamaica. The organization aimed to unite black people around the world and promote black pride and self-reliance. The UNIA also pushed for the Back to Africa movement, which called for black people to return to Africa and build a new black nation. Garvey believed that black people could never achieve true equality in white-dominated societies, and that they needed to create their own independent nation. In 1922, Marcus Garvey was charged with mail fraud in connection with a ship on the Black Star Line Orion. Further pressure from J. Edgar Hoover and his department's investigations, negative press, and complaints from stockholders soon led to Garvey gaining a reputation as a swindler. Garvey was convicted of the mail fraud charges and sent to Atlanta Federal Penitentiary. While serving his prison sentence, President Calvin Coolidge commuted his remaining time amidst protests from black Americans. In 1927, he was deported from the United States to Jamaica, where he continued his union work and political activism before moving to London in 1935. He died on June 10, 1940, after multiple strokes. Despite his controversial reputation, Garvey's legacy continued to instill pride and inspiration among many black people throughout the diaspora. His ideology has influenced members of the Nation of Islam, the Black Power movement, and the Rastafari movement.
Like the slight oppressor discourage my people. Because whatsoever education I acquired out of this